Lawyers of Reddit, what was your oh no moment in court? Story 1. I have another one that I've just remembered. Representing a guy accused of housebreaking. Managed to persuade the prosecutor that they couldn't prove it, so they dropped the case at the intermediate diet, procedural hearing, before the case called in court. Headed downstairs to the cells to break the good news to my client, who was remanded in custody. Have an idle glance at the details of the charge while I'm waiting for the cell staff to bring him out. The house that was broken into was my, then, next-door neighbor. Client was delighted that he was getting out. Him, "Aw, cheers, pal, you're the man. Can't he wait to get out?" Me, "No bother. Right, see that place you definitely didn't break into? I live next door, so gonna leave my house and car alone, please?" Him, Sure, pal. Me and the boys go up there stealing all the time." "What car do you drive?" I told him what kind of car it was. Needless to say, my car was broken into about 3 weeks later. Story 2. So I'm not a lawyer, but I'm a forensic case manager for an alternative to incarceration program. Basically, our program accepts clients who have severe mental illness, and instead of going to jail, they're mandated to mental health, the substance abuse treatment instead, and my job is to follow them throughout the mandate and be the point person for the court and their therapists. We go to court with them and talk with their lawyers and judge and provide a psychological evaluation. I have many stories and only been here about a year. This one guy we had to stop working with even though we initially accepted him into our program. He was eligible for inpatient residential treatment because he was very sick and a violence risk. We referred him to places and got a call from one saying they interviewed him, but they were rejecting him. Why? When asked to describe himself, he laughed and said, "I'm the murdering type." Yeah, residential facilities don't like hearing that, bud. Okay, one more. Our judge in our treatment court is really great. He's understanding that clients have relapses, and instead of going straight to jail for violating their plea, he'll give them a warning or give them more time on their mandate. Usually when clients are respectful and don't say dumb things. This guy, an old guy, at least 60, charged for selling his meds, comes up positive for candy after a couple months of his mandate. Okay, that's fine. We'll work with that. Unfortunately for him, when the judge asked about his urine positive and what happened, he said, "I was out partying. There was sweets. I wanted sweets. No remorse." He was made to go to more intense substance abuse treatment and added time to his mandate. Story 3. Reposting myself from years ago. Story from a friend of mine. He was defending a guy in court. Don't remember what he was charged with. The main witness for prosecution was on the stand and was asked if she could identify the defendant. She was scanning the courtroom, seemed confused. My friend was already silently celebrating because if she couldn't identify him, he could probably get all charge dropped. As he was intellectually adding this case to the win file, he happened to glance over at his client, who had just helpfully raised his hand to make it easier for her to identify him. Even the judge facepalmed on that one. Story 4. Corporate lawyer, but took on a pro bono immigration matter helping a victim of domestic abuse get her immigration status sorted out. She had been in the country for 20 years, originally legally, but not anymore. It took us multiple months to get a hearing scheduled. We've spent hours in U.S. Customs and Immigration Services offices by this point. Her situation is somewhat precarious, and we need to resolve this. She told me a few weeks before the hearing that she needed to reschedule because she was going to be out of the country. She said her daughter was going through a high-risk pregnancy and would be giving birth during that time, and my client was the only caregiver, available family for her daughter. That's fine. We put together a letter, get a note from the daughter's doctor about the medical necessity, etc. USCIS gives us a hard time about it, but ultimately hearing is rescheduled. My client and her other daughter come to the rescheduled hearing. Client gets asked about recent trips out of the country. "Well, I went on vacation to my home country last month." Instant cringe. She's in the U.S. illegally, and it's unclear whether or not she should have been traveling on the passport she was. I jumped in and tried to clean it up for her, and thankfully this USCIS official was more interested in moving us through the system than getting hung up on past issues. However, she within an inch of this all collapsing around her, getting kicked out of the country. Edit to add, I believe my client's trip was justified and necessary. I think she just misspoke. I spoke to both the pregnant daughter and the doctor who was caring for her while all of this was playing out. Still a scary moment. Story 5. I'm not a lawyer, but I work for a lawyer. Many years ago, my home county went through an abrupt and involuntary change of judge when one of the sitting judges was suspended and disbarred for bad conduct. This process took months, where our criminal docket was handled by a carousel of visiting judges from other counties who couldn't care less about our community and quickly came to resent having to fill in on the bench while our judge was prosecuted and the governor went through the slow process of appointing a replacement. It was standard for cases to just get set off or delayed. Our docket swelled and the jail emptied because very few people were being sentenced to jail. The visiting judges would grant low bonds or OR bonds in all but the most serious felonies. Petty criminals who didn't negotiate a plea with the prosecutor just reported back to court month after month with no disposition. One afternoon, an attorney presented for plea a man accused of domestic violence for boxing his child's ears. This was to be a routine plea for probation and anger management. When the facts of the case were read before the latest judge, he looked up from the docket and pursed his lips. When the prosecutor announced the parties had reached a plea agreement and the conditions and asked the court to accept the plea agreement, the judge stated simply, "No," and directed the defendant to have a seat. The defendant looked anxiously to his attorney as the judge outright rejected the plea agreement and sentenced the defendant to 30 days in jail. Well, the defendant freaked out, as did his wife, who loudly protested she needed the defendant at home working. The judge pointed at her from the bench and told her to shut it, or she would spend 30 days down as well. Well, the defendant's wife collapses into a weeping mess of bleach blonde hair and Kmart couture. The bailiff, who frankly looked surprised at being asked to do anything aside from remind people to remove their hat, escorted the defendant downstairs to the jail. The attorneys, prosecution and defense, looked very much like two children who were in trouble, but they weren't quite sure why. Once the shouts of the defendant faded into the belly of the courthouse and the sobs of the white trash in the back of the room slowed, the judge addressed the court. "Look," he said, "I know you all have a deal. And you know I don't have to accept it. I can leave him down there for 30 days. 30 days being a more than reasonable sentence for misdemeanor assault on a toddler." The judge continued, "I just want to teach him a lesson, and I will. You see, when I was a kid, my dad boxed my ears. He did it often, and one day he did it so hard, I'm now deaf in this ear. I know you all think it's no big deal," he addressed the defense attorney, "and you're pretty used to getting away with sweet deals for a while now, because you haven't had a judge." He leaned back in his chair and surveyed the courtroom, but this one hit a nerve with me. "And you can file whatever complaint you want later, but I'm just going to let that guy sit down there for a couple of hours and think about what he's done. Then I'll bring him back up." Well, we were stunned for sure. After months of just watching criminals come and go in a never-ending circle of arrest, plea, probation, it was honestly a shock to see someone sentenced to jail at all, much less in such an abrupt fashion. Toward the end of the court day, they brought the ear boxer back upstairs. He got a lecture and tearfully promised never to box his kid's ear again. But seeing him go to jail like that, even just for a couple of hours, was a pretty big "oh cow" moment. Edit: boxing. Someone's ears is when you slap them on the side of the head so the cupped palm covers the ears. It is very painful and can rupture an eardrum. Story 6. This was told to me by a legendary trial lawyer in my area. I probably have some of the details wrong, but here is gist. It was a personal injury case against the manufacturer of an industrial fan. It was supposed to be child-safe, but a kid got their fingers chopped off. The manufacturer was claiming that the plaintiff was only injured because the fan had been modified from its original condition. The defense lawyers had an exemplar fan that was straight from the manufacturer. They brought in an expert and, on direct, had him explain how it would be impossible for this kid or anyone else to hurt themselves. The idea was that the guard mechanism would have prevented people's fingers from getting too close to the blades. He was a well-qualified witness and gave very compelling testimony on direct exam. Unbeknownst to the defense lawyers or judge, the plaintiff lawyer had brought a very long extension cord and plugged in the perfectly safe fan. On cross-exam, he went over the expert's theories and had him say unequivocally that it is impossible for someone to injure their fingers on this fan if it is unmodified. The plaintiff lawyer then walked all the way across the courtroom, turned on the fan as high as it would go, and began walking it towards the expert. It was loud, so he had to kind of shout over it. He definitely had the jury's full attention. He gets right up to the witness and starts in on him, still half yelling due to the noise. "Show us, stick your fingers in." "No." "Come on, stick your fingers in." "I don't want to do that." The other side is jumping up to object, but the plaintiff lawyer is 2 inches from the expert yelling for him to stick his fingers in. The expert is looking terrified and shrinking away from the fan. The jury came back in favor of the plaintiff. It's my favorite example of show don't tell. Story 7. Not a lawyer, but this happened when I was at a pre-college law school thing. We were going to the Court of Appeals near our law school, and right before we left, the English teacher, who I'm sure was just there to make sure no one in the group of 30-plus teenagers wasn't vaping in the back row, said to bring a pencil and pad of paper to the trials because, and I quote, they're just so interesting, you know? Fast forward to sitting in on a murder trial, and there are signs, asterisk everywhere, asterisk saying that writing anything down was expressly prohibited. Then, the officer in the courtroom chewed someone not in our group out for writing stuff down, even though the stuff that person wrote wasn't related to the case, and then we all just turned our heads and stared at the teacher who told us to do just that, and the look on his face as he slowly slid the pencil and paper into his jacket pocket so as to avoid getting caught will be something I will never forget. Story 8. Many years ago, I was a puppy lawyer working in the public defender's office. We were in juvenile court defending a kid who had been busted by the cops in the very act of doing about $30K in vandalism damage to a public school. No doubt at all that he did it. And he was charged with varied and sundry crimes, which all required proof that the damaged public school building was property of another. You can see where I'm going with this. Everybody knows that a kid doesn't own the school, right? It's plain as can be, isn't it? It went down like this. Prosecutor, the state rests. Defense. We move to dismiss on the ground that the statutes defining the charged offenses all require proof that the damaged building was the property of another, and there has been no evidence introduced to that effect. Judge, you're right. Case dismissed. Prosecutor, turning slightly pale as it sinks in. But, Judge, visibly angry that this unpleasant person kid is going to walk. No, I cannot and will not allow you to reopen your case. There has been no surprise evidence or trickery here. They haven't done anything but sit there all morning. No, I cannot take judicial notice to supply a needed element that's missing from your proof. We are done here. Case dismissed. The prosecutor damn near broke the lectern when he slammed his notebook shut before stomping out of the courtroom. Story 9. I was cross-examining a guy who was arguing the car in question was really super important to him, and that he, in fact, owned it instead of his knucklehead brother who was seen dealing sweets out of it. He was waxing and waning about how he worked on it, drove it all the time, it was his baby, etc. So you say the car means a lot to you? Yes. I love it. And you drive it often? Still? Absolutely. Asterisk pregnant pause, asterisk. So where is the vehicle now? Could you ask that again? Where is the vehicle right now? It's, stored. Stored somewhere. Where? In storage. You don't know where the vehicle is right now, do you? He did not win the case. Story 10. I was in court for some restraining order hearings. I was sitting on the front row. Right before the judge comes in, the deputies bring in a lady in cuffs who had been causing a commotion in small claims court. They sat her down about 5 feet down the bench from me. She is not at all happy to be there. Well, about that time, the judge came in, and the lady immediately told him to suck a flipping banana. She continued, "You look like you just popped a banana out of your flipping mouth." I was pretty sure I was about to get pepper sprayed or something. Judge immediately gave her 30 days for contempt. She kept on like that and eventually got 120 days total. As the deputies took her to jail, she slipped out of her cuffs and tried to run. Then she apparently destroyed the bed in her cell. Got charged for escape and destruction of property as well. It was not her best day. Story 11. I clerked in family court as a law student. My judge was off, so I had a slow day finishing some orders. Other clerk IM'd me to come to her courtroom ASAP. I got in just in time to hear a VP tell the judge she didn't understand why it was such a big deal. She got a DUI with her kids in the car. Cue the judge yelling at this lady and the lawyer shrinking as small as possible in his chair. VP lady was petitioning the court for early release from ignition interlock because it was embarrassing for her kids. Number 2. Same court, same scenario in being pinged by other clerk. This time a dude and his wife were in court because he was 3 months behind on spousal support. I thought it was weird that he had like 8 lawyers with him for a simple hearing. One lawyer asked for a total, the answer? $4.5 million, no joke. Other lawyer for dude said they needed time to work out tax implications. Judge said he'd save him the legal fees and told him there was no write-off for spousal support. Dude wrote a check for $4.5 million. Hearing over. Story 12. Opposing party, tenant, accused my client, landlord, of putting cameras on the roof of the driveway to spy on the tenant's family. Tenant specifically said she saw my client putting up the cameras. Except the roof is pretty high and my client is 5'0". Got the opposing party to admit she lied under oath. Judge wasn't too happy and scolded her. Edit. Tenant, who is about 5'5", said she. Tenant stepped on a chair on her tiptoes to remove the cameras. If that was the case, it was simply physically impossible for my client to mount any cameras according to the tenant's testimony. Edit 2. On cross-examination, tenant testified that landlord did not use a ladder or chair to mount the cameras. And then later also testified that she removed the cameras when I asked if she brought any pictures of the cameras. It was complete nonsense, so no, there was never any cameras. Story 13. An attorney in my firm just had a trial with a good one. Our client blew a stop sign and T-boned plaintiff. Among other things, plaintiff had a hairline cervical fracture. He was prescribed a C-collar, which he supposedly wore for 3-4 months, including to his daughter's wedding. At trial, plaintiff's attorney had plaintiff put on his cervical collar to show the jury. He had it on while his attorney did the direct. Unfortunately, plaintiff and his attorney didn't realize he put it on upside down. There is a part that is supposed to go down on your chest for stability. Well, it was on upside down, so it was sticking up in front of his mouth. His attorney asked him about that being annoying and in the way of his eating. He gets done with his examination, and the first thing the attorney from my firm asks is, "Can you please explain to the jury why you put the cervical collar on upside down?" Plaintiff denied it was on upside down, and 2 jurors blurted out, yeah, you did." Jury is not supposed to comment or ask questions. Needless to say, the jury did not like his testimony, and he was awarded nothing. Story 14. I was a family law paralegal, and we had one case that was a total cowstorm. It was clear from a week in that the mother's only goal was to utterly destroy the father in any way she could. We wound up getting temporary custody for the father and actually went to trial because the mother refused to cooperate. The mother was representing herself, so my boss said I could stop by and watch for a bit for the experience and to satisfy my own curiosity. The mother called co-workers of the father. I'm not sure why, but she asked a female co-worker, "Isn't it true that you told father that you think I'm a bad person?" My boss tried to object for relevance, but it was too late. The witness looked the mother right in the eye and said, "Absolutely." Needless to say, we won that one for the father. It's 10 years later, and the mother is still trying to get custody back. She hasn't seen the kid since he was in diapers. She just won't let her revenge plot go. Story 15. Worked as a clerk at the local court after law school. There was this case about sending a 15-year-old girl to a rehab youth home since she had problems with alcohol. This girl had a backstory that made the story of the girl from 13 Reasons Why look like a fairy tale. Her parents had basically dumped her and her brother and left to live in another country, so they were called over Skype. So basically the girl had an attorney, the parents had an attorney, and the state was represented by 2 attorneys. After reading her file, I thought that no human being can be normal after the cow she's been through, that she'd be a quiet, broken-down girl during the whole trial. Boy, was I wrong. She didn't even need an attorney. She basically out-argumented her parents' attorney and the state attorney herself. I remember how awed I was of her strength and energy, but I also felt sad that I knew what she had to go through to get this strength. I always think back to that case. I really hope she's doing fine now. Story 16. This will be buried, but it's a good story. But I represented myself in small claims court against a former landlord in a case of illegal eviction. I was in university at the time, renting a top-floor room in a shared dwelling with 2 housemates on the same floor and the landlord occupying the basement. We all shared the ground floor, which held the kitchen and living room. One day, landlord come up to my room and tells me I have until 2 p.m. to clear out my stuff because I was being evicted. I had paid rent, on time, for 4 months, had provided a security deposit, and had never been in conflict with either of the housemates. All told, I was confused. Landlord refused to provide a reason for eviction, so I called the police. The attending officer informed me that he couldn't compel landlord to let me stay, which I expected. I only wanted an official record of what happened on a police report. So I sued landlord for the cost of my security deposit, rent that had been paid for the month I was evicted, the cost of having to find new lodgings on 0 notice, the cost of the motel I stayed in until those lodgings were secured. It was mid-term, so I had to be in the city to be at school, and damages, all totaling around $3K. Essentially, I doubled my reported costs in the claim. In court, it's better to ask for more and let the judge decide what's fair, as long as you don't come off as greedy. Landlord countersued for damages to property, of which there was none. Come the trial, I had all documents, records, and discovery provided by me and to me from landlord, ready to go. Landlord came with idiot advisor who acted as counsel for landlord, no documents, and one witness. Landlord had tried to convince other housemates to testify against me in court, but they refused. Anyway, the first oh cow moment was when the idiot advisor actually said to the judge that they could do whatever they wanted with tenants, and had been doing so for years. And the judge bench slapped this moron for not understanding the basic tenets of the Landlord-Tenant Act. It has a new name, can't remember it. The second was when the judge asked if landlord would take the stand to present their evidence. An idiot advisor informed the judge that landlord would not be taking the stand at all in order to plead their case or refute mine. The judge actually said, "Well, I don't understand how you expect to win without presenting any evidence, but okay." The third moment was when their witness took the stand. He was the handyman landlord called to do little things around the house. He painted the room after I was evicted. In cross, I asked him the cost of painting, less than half of the countersuit, and as he was called as an expert on the repairs required by the landlord, I asked if in his expert opinion repairs, painting, were necessary. He said no, but he painted anyway because landlord paid him to. After their witness proved to be a better witness for me, the case was essentially over. The judge asked us to wait a moment as he pulled out a calculator. He looked up from the calculator and stated he found the case in my favor and awarded me the actual costs I incurred, less the inflated damages, around $1,800, which is exactly what I expected. I asked the judge for a ruling on their countersuit, which brought my favorite oh cow moment of the whole ordeal. He said, "The suit against you is entirely dismissed with prejudice for failure to provide any evidence, testimonial, or something at all to justify this eviction. Landlord is ordered to pay X amount, plus all court fees associated with filing this suit." And after the official ruling was passed, he said to the landlord, "I recommend you find a better advisor because this guy," referring to moron advisor, "has no idea what he's talking about." It was beautiful. Story 17. Two of my favorites. I'm a lawyer, do criminal defense first trial. I had called the prosecutor numerous times trying to settle witness was uncooperative and begging not to go to court, but no dice. Had never spoken to my client. Not ideal, can explain later if need be. Client was accused of domestic battery for grabbing someone's arms and leaving bruises. Witness says nothing happened. Put my client up to say the same. I guess the prosecutor wasn't paying attention because as soon as he looks at the guy, he turns around and mouths, "He doesn't have hands." My client had stubs where it should have been and maybe a finger or two. Can't grab anything, not guilty verdict? Second was my stupid mistake, porta-potty tipping case. I invoked the rule and sent all witnesses outside, including the co-defendant in my case. I spaced and asked the kid witness if he recognized anyone else in the courtroom as being there when toilets were tipped. Luckily, it wasn't on the record, but I felt like a giant idiot. Found guilty, but beat the offer. Case was dropped on appeal because my client was arrested for felony assault on law enforcement and the state didn't care about toilets anymore. Story 18. Not exactly court, I am Mexican, and we have a conciliatory figure that tries to fix problems between consumers and providers. I was making practices, so I actually never signed the confidentiality contract that every worker signs, but still gonna try to keep details at the minimum. So there was a consumer whose phone broke and he sent it to warranty. I had no details. But knowing this phone manufacturer in particular, I knew they wouldn't validate the warranty. But still, I didn't expect what they said. Warranty is voided because of misuse of the device. Our warranty policies dictates that any uncommon use of the device is qualified as misuse. This includes storing it on your pocket, bag, backpack, organ, any closed, non-natural environment. Needless to say, everyone in the room was shocked, at least. I really wanted the authority to punish them for so nonsense policies. Before anyone worries, this is only on Mexico, and this company in particular is known for a good customer service in the U.S. Story 19. Bench trial of complicated commercial litigation case. We have up on the courtroom monitor a spreadsheet setting forth how much the defendant owes us, and our expert is going through it line by line. Defense attorney objects stating that he was never provided with this spreadsheet in discovery. It wasn't on our exhibit list, blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, leaning against the wall at defense table is a poster board blow-up of said spreadsheet. Judge looks at the spreadsheet on the screen, looks at the blow-up, looks back at the screen, looks back at the blow-up and says, pointing to the poster board, "Counsel, is that your exhibit there sitting at counsel table?" Attorney, "Yes, Your Honor." Judge, Isn't it exactly the same as the spreadsheet up on the screen? Counsel. Well, they've got an electronic version on the screen. The one on the poster board is from a PDF. Judge, shaking his head in annoyance. Overruled. This idiot attorney objected to lots of exhibits in a similar way, some of which we pointed out were on his own exhibit list. We won, BTW. Okay. Story 20. I was being sued by a past vendor, and it finally came to trial. They refused numerous offers to settle, which would have cost me significant money, and I didn't like it at all, but my lawyer insisted it was just business. My lawyer was asking one of their witnesses questions, and the local branch manager sitting behind him whispered into the witness's ear with each question. Finally, the judge spoke up. Who are you? I'm the local branch manager. Are you sworn in? I don't know. No, you aren't sworn in. I want to hear what he has to say. When it's your turn to talk, you'll be called as a witness and sworn in. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. I'm sorry. You know what? Go sit in the back of the courtroom. And he had to stand up in front of everybody and walk to the back of the room. That had to be the first oh cow moment for their lawyer. My lawyer and I had fun with them. I advised her what questions to ask them and me, and they ended up looking stupider and stupider as the trial went on. They had no documentation, no evidence, nothing, while my lawyer had lots of detailed evidence that they were wrong, and I was innocent. Another oh cow moment for their lawyer. They honestly thought that the judge would find in their favor because they were a big Fortune 500 company and I was just a little one-man show, which is what one of their lawyers had told me when I had begged him to drop the suit because it was so stupid. The judge ended up yelling at them for wasting everybody's time and said that she couldn't believe they were a Fortune 500 company with this kind of accounting and inventory system. They had to pay my legal fees, too. Story 21. Prosecuting a DV case a few years back. Real lack of physical evidence, so it was pretty much a she said, he said. Victim was to be my first witness during trial. I prepped her the Friday before trial. One of my standard prep lines is, dress like you're going to a job interview. I wasn't going to be able to see her the morning of trial before going on the record because she had a civil case in another branch during my jury selection. Anyways, case begins, finish voir dire and openings. Call her to the stand. She walks in with incredibly done-up braided hair, huge hoop earrings, shiny black pleather high-heeled knee-high boots, and a skin-tight shiny black pleather dress that cut off a bit too far above mid-thigh. The moment she walked in the door, all three of my female jurors started covering their mouths and suppressing laughs. Lost the case that moment. I've since changed my line to dress like you're going to church with your judgmental grandmother. Story 22. Not a lawyer. I was about 14 or 15 when we came to the States. My immigration hearing was conducted in Russian. In the U.S., embassy in Moscow. My entire family is in the room with the INS agent, a young guy in his mid-20s, retelling our life story and making a case for granting us permanent resident visas. At some point, the agent's phone rings. It's his girlfriend calling him in English to tell him that close relationship last night was amazing and she's still glowing from all the orgasms. He comments on her amazing blowjob technique and asks if she would fudge him in a public park because that's one place they haven't messed up in yet. We can hear more or less everything. Meanwhile, my mom is not as much blushing, more like getting beet red. My English is not 100%, but enough to understand most of it, so I'm trying not to snicker too loudly. Finally, the guy snaps out of it. Him. Ma'am, tell me again what your job was in Russia? My mom, in perfect British accent. I am an English teacher. Long pause. Him, stamping our visas. Your request for permanent residency has been granted. Welcome to the United States. As we're walking out of the room, he turns to my mom, looking like a lost puppy. Please don't tell my boss, okay? Story 23. Not a lawyer, but I had to take out a protective order earlier this year against my wife in order to get sole custody of our son during her postpartum psychiatric crisis. She chose to contest the order at a hearing, and she was off the flipping rails. At one point, while cross-examining me, she objected to her own line of questioning, yelling, "Objection, Your Honor. I'm getting flipping pissed off, and I need some crackers. Does anyone have crackers, and can we take a break?" The judge surprisingly granted a short recess and went back to his desk to get her some crackers. But he wasn't fast enough. Before he got back, my wife had run out to the parking lot and slung her hammock in between two random cars, refusing to come back inside. I was sitting on the witness stand when the bailiff came back inside and said, "No cow, Your Honor, Mrs. Trashkit Ball 23 is in a hammock and won't come back inside." At this point, the judge lost his composure and started laughing at the absurdity of it all. Hell, I was too. She did eventually come back inside and yell some more before faking a seizure and going to the hospital. What a day, man. Update. Wide-angle lens. During the course of her manic psychosis, which began while evacuating 300 miles from one of this year's hurricanes, my wife was involuntarily committed for 2 weeks at an awful for-profit MHI. Discharged without medication access before she was stabilized, arrested and jailed for 3 days because the state's domestic violence law mandates that DV aggressors go directly to jail regardless of their mental state, and a judge denied my request to have her transferred from jail to a MHI, and then released without bond by a magistrate judge who somehow wasn't aware of the severity of her condition. She was then running around for a week and a half with a guy she met at the MHI before the hearing I mentioned. The hearing seemed to be something of a turning point for her. She started communicating with her family more, asking for more photos and videos of our son. A week after the hearing, I took advantage of a significant name typo in the criminal no-contact order and a loophole in the no-contact portion of the civil TPO to begin communicating with her about potential treatment plans. She started to come down from her month-long manic episode, and about 2 weeks after reopening contact, I convinced her to check herself into an intensive outpatient program at an excellent university hospital. More than a month later, she's getting discharged from the IOP program this week. She's stable. She's herself. She's moving in with her grandmother who lives in the area, and we spent the last week and a half together. The first extended time we've had together since everything went to hell. There's still 6-figure medical bills to contend with. Our insurance company is not pleased, as well as criminal charges awaiting resolution. But she and our son are now safe. That's what matters. I've been commuting 300 miles 5 times a month to keep up with my National Guard and work obligations, but we're starting marriage counseling when I'm back in town next week. When I do something like type it all out, it hits me really hard. We're lucky that we all survived this. We'll be even luckier if our family survives it and stays together in the long term. I'm committed to trying, but we'll see what happens. Story 24. But at my custody hearing, my stupid ex insisted that our son, who's on the spectrum, didn't have autism at all and only had behavioral issues. Also that she'd refused to call the office that made the diagnosis, and that his behavioral problems started going away in August of 2014. My lawyer in cross-examination, isn't August of 2014 the month in which he started spending most of his time at his father's house? And also when he started getting behavioral therapy for Asperger's? Stupid ex. I don't know what you're getting at, but yes, those are the same dates. Needless to say, it was all downhill from there. Story 25. NAL. But had a few lawsuits that my family was subjected to that purposefully terminated our family business. We were being sued by my mom's cousin, who was a lawyer, but not in our state. She couldn't pass the bar in our home state and moved to a state where the testing was less rigorous, so she had a legal team of her own. In the suit, she was claiming that our side of the family had embezzled funds from the business. Her mother, who was elderly but not yet senile, was called to the stand as their witness. As she was being questioned about the heinous things that we had allegedly done, her responses were generally, no, they wouldn't do that, and ours kids are nice kids. They're the reason why the business is successful. And finally, who keeps saying all of these awful things about them? Pretty sure that caused Cousin's lawyers to have an oh cow moment. She lost that and every other suit that she brought against us. Story 26. I have 2 stories that both occurred when I was doing first appearances, to determine bail, for the public defender's office in my 3L year. One of the guys on the list for an appearance is a regular. He went through our office frequently, and it was always on candy charges. By this time, he knows exactly what happens if he turns himself in. If you show up the night before, you get a lovely jumpsuit for your appearance. If you show up the morning of, you stay in your street clothes. This genius shows up that morning wearing a shirt that says, high as fudge. About 1 week later, I was doing a quick interview of one of the defendants I was going to represent and decided I liked him. He was a pretty cheerful, chatty dude. I figured if he kept that up, we'd be just fine and stack up a quick W. We proceeded to the courtroom, and he was probably my 5th or 6th client of the morning. As soon as he got into the courtroom, he began telling the judge why he should be released with no bail. The judge asked him to remain quiet and to let his representative from the PD make his case for him. Immediately, my client starts talking up and down about the First Amendment and his right to speak. I leaned forward to the little hole in the glass box to start whispering at him to shut the fudge up repeatedly. The judge had a hard time keeping a straight face and said to my client, You should listen to your defender. Unbeknownst to me, the microphone in the box was picking up my frantic whispering, and the entire courtroom heard me telling him to shut the fudge up. Story 27. Prosecuting a drive-by shooting. Had a big map printed out and asked the main eyewitness to point out where he was standing at the time of the shooting so that we could show he was in a good position distance to see the shooter. The map was maybe 3 feet away from the witness stand. Witness said, "Can you bring that thing closer?" "I can't see all that good." Verdict. Not guilty, ninja edit. Another great story about a totally different case. Fight between neighbors got physical. Neighbor 1, black, beat the cow out of neighbor 2, Asian, so neighbor 1 got charged. At trial, neighbor 2 was testifying about the argument. Actual quote, "I didn't call him a NR. I said he was acting like a NR." Prosecutor was a black man and was less than pleased that his victim in the case was such a dickwad. Not guilty verdict, and both neighbors ended up getting no contact orders. Story 28. I was a newly minted legal aid lawyer ready to ride in on my white horse to enforce a protective order for a woman whose abusive ex-boyfriend wouldn't stop calling her, despite having been court-ordered to do so in a previous case. He had called her dozens of times in a single day, called her mom, called her workplace, called her friends. It was crazy. We had phone records. I presented our case, slam dunk. Ex-boyfriend's lawyer gets up with rebuttal evidence. Earlier the morning of the phone calls, she had driven to his workplace, taken a baseball bat to his car, smashed in all the windows, and left a note taped to his steering wheel about how that was what he got for leaving her for that skank. She had mentioned none of this to me in the client interview. That was the day I learned to talk to opposing counsel before the hearing starts. Story 29. I was holding a jury trial as the prosecutor on a disorderly and resisting and obstructing a police officer charge. The defendant was one of 2 charged. His co-defendant hadn't shown up for the pretrial and had a bench warrant put on him. Defendant shows with 1 witness. We pick a jury, finish our opening statements, and break for lunch. While we're waiting to resume, I realize I recognize the name of the witness and look through my records. He brought his co-defendant, the one who was also charged and skipped out, to testify for him. I pulled defense counsel aside and told him what was up. We agreed the witness needed to use the restroom, and miraculously he never showed back up. Trial went forward short the defendant's witness. Easy guilty verdict. Story 30. Came here way too late for this story to get much traction, but I worked at a small firm for personal injury medmal cases. I was going off to Bumbleskunch Nowhere, Kentucky for a case against a doctor who was pretty negligent of our client's boyfriend, who had passed away in his care over Christmas. We were asking for damages for their 2 kids, mostly. They'd been together for 8 years or so, but weren't married. Now, when lawyers tell you stuff shouldn't be a surprise in court, they're right. Virtually everything is filed with the court beforehand, and cow doesn't happen in secret during the trial itself, usually. In our case, the opposition attorney pulled out some stuffy family law clauses stipulating that there's a legal presumption that if a woman has kids while technically married to someone, those kids are assumed to be the husband's kids, even if they don't live in the same state and had been planning a divorce for over a year. The reason this was allowed, to the best of my knowledge, is that it was part of a last-minute motion to dismiss, which doesn't have to be part of discovery, and can be filed at any time. Please correct me if I'm wrong. This is limited understanding. Well, you might be able to guess where this is going. Judge doesn't dismiss the case, but jury instructions are amended a bit, and more importantly, hours of trial time are spent now talking about whether or not the kids belong to our deceased man. Long enough that the jury is thoroughly convinced that our clients are fakers somehow, and we didn't have a reasonable amount of time to try to get a genetic test done to prove paternity post-mortem until after the trial had concluded. I've never seen someone caught with their pants down so decisively as this. We hadn't considered that family law would be brought in partially because the couple had been together so long. We definitely lost. The kids got nothing except to lose a father over Christmas, and that doctor will go on to be a poor doctor to others. Story 31. Not a lawyer, and this didn't happen in a court, but I got into a car accident some years ago, and the other guy tried to sue me for a few million, claiming he had serious back injuries. I did some digging and found his Facebook page, where he openly posted about how he wasn't actually hurt, but he was going to sue the other driver and take as much as he could and never have to work again. Obviously, I printed out every page and gave it to my lawyer. At the deposition preparing for potential trial, I answered all my questions as honestly as I could, and then my lawyer began grilling him hard. asking repeatedly about dates and doctor's visits, how the injury affected him, making sure to get every little detail he could. Then he pulls out the Facebook post and looks straight at him and asks, "One last question. Are these your kids in this photo?" Pointing out the profile picture next to the posts about faking the extent of his injury to try and make a buck. The guy looked like he just watched his puppy get shot, like very obviously trying to hide a mix of panic and defeat, asking his lawyer, "Isn't this private information?" To which his lawyer replied, "No, it's on your public Facebook page." I'll never know if that affected anything. My insurance company settled with them. But God, was that satisfying to see the look of horrified panic on that unpleasant person's face when he knew he was caught. Story 32. Not a lawyer. Neither was the person that witnessed this. But it took place in a courtroom, so it's sort of relevant. My brother is a Leo and was in the courtroom one day. A guy was on trial for assaulting his girlfriend's 4YO daughter. He was watching the kid while the mom ran some errands. Apparently, the case was pretty clear that he did it, so his lawyer wanted him to accept a plea deal. Well, this just seemed like a terrible idea in the defendant's eyes. He fired his lawyer on the spot and decided he would defend himself. The judge tried to talk him out of it because it would obviously be in his best interest to be represented by a real lawyer. The guy stood in front of the jury and said something along the lines on, "What I'm about to tell you is proof that I'm an honest person and wouldn't lie to you about me assaulting that little girl. Because I'm telling you this, you have to believe me. When I was a little kid, I assaulted my little sister. I wouldn't tell you that if I wasn't an honest person." My brother said the judge just removed his glasses and stared at the guy while everyone else started packing up their things. Case closed. Story 33. Not a lawyer, but the assistant DA. That was pushing so hard to get me to pay a disorderly conduct ticket. The ticket was for $500, but that'd go on my record and fudge that. I was working at Children's Hospital and also teaching English as a second language part-time. Both career paths would be messed up by that ticket. Here's why I got the ticket. I asked a guy to pull his car forward 1 car length so that he'd stop blocking the drive. He wouldn't respond to me, so I got up to his car window and asked again. He slammed the car door into my face, breaking my glasses. Then he tried getting out of the car, screaming at me. I held his door shut until he gave up trying, then I went to call security. Someone else saw it, went and told security. Security calls the sheriffs. I went back to the drive and back to work. The guy accelerates towards me. I barely get out of the way. He strikes my leg with his front bumper. I scream at him, "Are you trying to terminate me?" Then took a kick at his car as he passed by. Sheriff shows up, doesn't review the tape, simply writes asterisk, both asterisk of us disorderly conduct tickets. I get a lawyer for $500. I go to court and he says they should throw it out, no problem. Sheriff's report says exactly what I said happened. We apply to get the video footage, etc. We tell all this to the assistant DA. She says she's going to push it through court anyways, doesn't read the report. We go to court several times for discovery, reschedules, etc. Next time we go to court, we're adamant that we will take it to a jury trial. Fudge it, I'll pay those fees. It's a new ADA this time. We tell him the same cow, he ain't budging either. Okay, fudge you. Jury time, let's schedule this cow asterisk and asterisk we do. The judge has even recorded the date and time after discussing with me when's good for me. She's about to slam her gavel with the ADA. Rushes over to my lawyer and says, "I'm moving to dismiss." What? He interrupts the judge, says he'd like the case dismissed. Judge looks at him like, "Are you serious?" But she asks, "We've been here 3 times now. We just scheduled the jury trial and he's agreed to all the fees. So asterisk, why asterisk are you moving to dismiss?" ADA asks the judge if she's read the sheriff's report. She says no. Why would I have that? Why would I read it yet before there's any reason for me to? Surely asterisk you of the asterisk read it, which is why we've been here this many times. Why don't you read it to all of us? So he reads the report. It says what happened. The entire courtroom laughs. The judge says, dismissed. Sorry for wasting your time, mister. Just so, while glaring at the ADA. Then tells the court clerk to remove the scheduling. Justice Boner. Story 34. Not really an oh cow moment, but more of a world's dumbest lawyers moment. I was defending a tenant in an eviction case. At the close of my client's testimony, I thought it would be good to at least offer her testimony about an improper motive for eviction. I asked her, "Why do you think the landlord wanted you out?" Objection, lay opinion, speculation, etc. Overruled. So I repeat the question, and she answers by saying, 'Cause they gave me a notice to vacate." We all had a nice chuckle about that one, especially opposing counsel, who had a very asterisk, loud, hearty laugh asterisk, while gauging the judge's reaction. The judge ruled in our favor in the end, but it was kind of a Pyrrhic victory. Still, that's what she wanted, and I won her case. Can't feel too bad about that. This case was also when I decided I'm just going to call people dicks regardless of gender. Opposing counsel was an unpleasant woman, and people might think I'm being sexist if I call her a bad person, so I'll just say she was a real banana. Equality.